Looking back over the long 6 years I spent with you, it is very clear you had no respect for me. Your violent, threatening, and terrifying words were devastating in more ways than you will ever know. These words still haunt me. I wake up with nightmares, afraid of your abusive treatment. I fear I will always question myself because of all the ugly words you have said to me. After hearing over and over how you said I was horrible and worthless, I cannot erase those messages.
Isabella tells us what Michigan is prepared to do to stop human trafficking.
The 15-year-old who's forced to have sex is a victim, not a criminal.
Good police work making a big dent in human trafficking in that epidemic here in Metro Detroit. Action News, as you mentioned, obtaining exclusive video of Operation Cross Country. Websites like Backpage.com have seen an uptick this week in escort listings, with graphic catch lines like, "Meat is fresh."
Because we didn't have a demand, did we have the problem? No.
Human trafficking is extremely profitable. It's so profitable that we're seeing some drug traffickers get out of drug trafficking and into human trafficking.
Very lucrative, and that's why we're seeing an increase, and we're seeing folks right next door.
Girls were forced to work in hair braiding salons.
He was elected to uphold the law, but the Attorney General says he was living in a legal double life. Ingham County prosecutor Stuart Dunnings III, facing 15 criminal counts, accused of using prostitutes hundreds of times. The women, part of a human trafficking ring.
The victims here, brutalized, assaulted, manipulated, provided drugs, imprisoned.
You know, nationwide the convictions are up year to year, but it's hard to find these guys until somebody comes forward, reports that they've seen a victim. It's hard to pin them down.
So, you know, I was 12 here in this picture, and I look at it, and I'm like, you know, there was nothing that stood out or made me unique from anybody else. I was actually quite tomboyish looking. You know, wasn't that pretty kind of girl that you would think about that would, and so what made me stand out? You know, that's a question that I ask myself, you know, sometimes, why me?
When I first came here, I thought I was gonna have a good time, go to school, call my parents whenever I want to, you know, have friends and play soccer because I like playing soccer, you know, do all that. But none of those existed once I came here. They all got taken over from me. It happened here in Michigan, in Ypsilanti. That stuff was happening right there.
I always tell people when we look at Michigan that the first case involved a lower part of Michigan in which two farm workers who had some mental disabilities were utilized by a farmer for 10 years, promised wages, given horrendous kinds of living conditions. So it doesn't matter where you are, the issue becomes the rumors of where it might be. There's a difference between rumors and the reality of it.
We sitting in Michigan think, well, this happens to somebody else around the world. This is happening in China. This is happening in Pakistan. This is happening in Africa. This is also happening in Lansing. In Detroit, it's also happening in Flint and Pontiac. It happens in rural communities, Traverse City.
Coming from a very small rural area, I was born and raised in Jackson, Michigan. My father was a chronic alcoholic, and my mother would come and go periodically. She wasn't really, didn't really want to be a mother, so a lot of times we would get put in the foster care system. At one point, I got put into the juvenile system, not so much the side where people were locked up, but it was supposed to be a program that would help families that were in conflict. It really didn't help me at all, and it didn't make us any closer. So when I got out of there, I remember, you know, just running away, staying away from, because I really didn't have anywhere to go. I was pretty much homeless.
My dad was a friend of a trafficker in Togo, and they were very good friends. And yeah, I promised my dad and myself education, a better life here. Yeah. So my parents were happy, and I was happy. So I came with him, and that's how it all started.
I had just turned 13 years old. I was at the Jackson County Fair, and I met this gentleman the next day. I was hungry, I was tired. He bought me something to eat. He had gave me a beer. It was the first time I had ever drunk alcohol. And then the next thing I know, I was on my way to Detroit. I didn't know what his intentions were because he hadn't been anything but nice to me.
I can't tell you the number of cities I've been in that they say they're in the top 5 of sex trafficking, or they are a hub for human trafficking. And I've been in more than 5 cities who've said that.
I don't think that you can use statistics because human trafficking cases just aren't documented the way other crimes are documented.
No, people sometimes think this is an inner city problem. It's not an inner city problem. It's definitely occurring in the suburbs.
It's all over the news, it's all over our schools, it's all over the papers. It really is everywhere. If you just look, you can't miss it.
I think when you're thinking of human trafficking in general, I like to think of it as where does vulnerability meet potential exploitation for financial gain? But our first definition came in 2000 around the passage of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and is rooted in principles of freedom of will and the sort of anti-slavery principles.
Human trafficking is an umbrella term that encompasses different types of trafficking, including sex trafficking and labor trafficking.
And it's really the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into 2 main categories, which would be either for labor or for sexual services.
It's something that we have never been without in the United States. We even fought a war. Everybody knows that. And there was an assumption that that indeed ended slavery. It did not end slavery. Wherever there is population, there is vulnerability.
I mean, right now, here, in the community in which you sit, this is happening.
There is a huge divide between the talk and rhetoric about victims of human trafficking and who we are willing to identify as a victim of human trafficking.
Dramatized, made huge on the screen, and that's really not necessarily how it happens. Not to say it doesn't happen like that, but that's the message that has been given, and that's the kind of thing that we like to think. We're not comfortable with the idea that slavery would exist and that we would even knowingly but unwittingly not recognize it.
It is invisible right now, and it's really important that we bring it out of the shadows.
There are a lot of myths surrounding human trafficking. One is that victims are perfect, right? It's the perfect victim myth. We expect victims to never make bad choices and to do exactly what we want them to do when we rescue them. And that's just not the reality of the clients that we serve in the human trafficking clinic.
The victims are vulnerable for whatever reason. Maybe home life. Parents may not be involved in their lives. They might already be in the criminal justice system for truancy type issues.
Many have been severely traumatized, are addicted to drugs, or might have loving feelings towards their exploiters, which we don't have to understand, but is the reality for our clients.
The perpetrator sees that, and they use that to gain the trust of the victim or the survivor.
He took me to a place called the Crestwood Motel. It was a place where they were prostituting, and that's where I turned my first tricks. That night I was told by the older girl that when we got home that what I needed to do was stand in line. I had gave him every dime that I made. And that was what we did consistently on a daily basis.
Kojo literally gave me a different name. My name originally was Kwame, but he gave me a name, choose a name from somewhere, I don't know where. It's Victorian. Back then I was known as, and he gave me different birth certificate. Everything was fake to come here with. And I have to learn all these different dates and different birthdays and names. I had to learn them confidently. Every time someone asked me, I had to tell them without hesitating. It was ridiculous. I spent so many time learning this, getting them in my head. Originally I was supposed to be 11, but I was make 7 to go, so I can start 3rd grade. Every time we go somewhere, he would say, yeah, this is my kids, yeah, this is the name. He literally have all this planned out, and we had to learn, then had to follow every line. Pretty much he does all the talking, we just didn't listen.
At the age of 14, I got arrested for prostitution. When I was arrested, I was took to the juvenile home, and I was told that I would not be released until my father came, one of my guardians came and got me. So my dad came and got me, and instead of taking me home, he took me back to his house and dropped me off. My dad was given $80, and he went back home. So basically that's where I stayed. I felt that nobody else wanted me. This is the only person that cared about me. Even though he really didn't do a lot to take care of me, I was actually providing everything that I got.
I had to be a completely different person. So it was just like taking away part of my life. Now I don't know who I am anymore.
How did he justify that to your parents?
I don't think he ever did. I don't think they knew I was changing my name at all. I don't think they did. So he was consistent, just manipulative, very hypocritic, and he's always drinking, doing absolutely insane things in the house.
I stayed for quite a while, almost until I was an adult. At one point, I started getting involved in drugs. He had us working at a topless and bottomless bar, and I was introduced to cocaine at that time. So I had tried it, and I liked it. He had fractured my skull one day for lying to him, saying that I had not spent any of the money, in which I did, and somebody had told him that I did. So I got in trouble for that.
So this was the bar that he had bought. It was called Fatal Attraction. I mean, he appealed to everybody's taste. I mean, you have lobster bisque, you have breast of chicken, and he used some of the girls' names in here. It's Breast of Chicken Denise, which is one of the girls that worked for him. When I first started, I didn't start out on the streets. There was venues that you could go to where all of these girls would work. They had pimps that were there, and the men would just sit around and wait for the money to come in. The establishment was in on it too. For everybody, it was like a win-win situation. It was for the guys, for the girls, for the pimps. I mean, everybody was making money at that time. Like I said, when I was working in Highland Park, we worked in a 1-block radius across the street from the Howard Johnsons, and we worked out there for a little bit too.
Hi.
All right, go in the bedroom. Sorry.
No worries at all. How much longer?
Not much longer, son.
Not much longer. Not much longer at all.
When I first started, we were on 8 Mile. That's where I first started working. And then from there, we had to move down to Highland Park.
Okay, yeah.
On the streets. The motel was right next door. So it was like, and we would just do our dance, get off, find our clients, take them to the hotel next door. After a while, some of the girls were just having sex right there in the bar. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just give a lap dance and then just pull your G-string over. The guy would do it right there. Yeah, let me go get my keys. I'm gonna get my coat. I'll take you to the house that I was first brought to before I went to work. So I actually went past it the other day there's Maida. So take this street if you can.
This street?
Mm-hmm. So that is the house right there, the brown one. And so when I was there, the carport,
one right here?
Yep, the carport wasn't there. I remember that was my bedroom down in the basement right there, the basement window. That's where I stayed. I remember one time we were gonna leave him, but I mean, the way he had control, we actually slept out here for 2 days in the car, and we'd have to go down to the bathroom at the gas station. And finally the police came by and made us go back in the house because they said we couldn't sleep out in the car.
Did the police ever ask you why exactly you were sleeping?
No. Nope, and there was like all these young girls living in this home. Nobody ever questioned, nobody ever asked anything.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd come out of there dressed with little teeny shorts on, little tank tops, high heels. The girl that was up in the top bedroom, that's where he shot her in the face.
Yeah, I can't. This just looks like a normal house to me.
So anyway, this was the lobby, and what you did was you got a room, either top or bottom, and then where you just came in it was a bar. And so the girls would sit in the bar, and as soon as they got a guy that wanted to date, then you would take them down to your room, you do your date, and then you go back up to the bar. And the guys that were trafficking us would just sit in the bar and watch how many you turned.
He could watch all of his girls working, know what room they were in.
Alternatives for Girls started in 1987 as an organization to respond to seeing girls and young women at risk for sexual exploitation, homelessness, and running away and other street activity. We have an after-school prevention program for girls in Southwest Detroit. We have a runaway homeless youth shelter for girls from anywhere. And lastly, we respond through our outreach program to girls and women who are in the community who are either engaged in the sex industry or probably at the highest risk for involvement in the sex industry.
This is the 28th year of the agency. A year after the agency started, Christmas Eve was the first day that the outreach van went out. So we've been doing this for a long time. We give out harm reduction materials, so we give out condoms. We don't give out the needles, but we give out a bleach kit for women to clean their needles so they can use clean needles. 100% of the time, if they're not talking to us, somebody's stopping them because they want something from them. We don't want anything. We want to give them something, and we want them to know that if they want to talk, they can. And sometimes we're like people that somebody will get to talk to. So we're in Southwest Detroit, and we are doing 4th Street now. So this is 4th Street. When we're en route, no radio, which obviously we have radio, but we don't have any radio playing. We have windows cracked. We drive in the right-hand lane, and we drive 20 to 25 miles per hour. Yes, heat is blasting.
I'm gonna say, and it gets hot in here too, so.
I love winter.
So we just like to make sure we're safe and make sure the woman is safe too as well. Because sometimes, like, it could be an instance where we see a woman and her pimp is like a block away or a couple of feet away. You know, we just like to look around, like the driver, the third person will be looking just to make sure that everything's okay and watching him and things like that.
So the way we identify women is basically by behaviors. It's not about a look. It's a behavior. Are they looking for cars, looking at cars? Do they wave? So this is a truck stop. So we usually will pull up to the truck stop and just wait a couple minutes because we see women may be in the trucks. And so we will pull up.
Hi, how are you? Hi, I have a film crew with me. It's for sex trafficking. And you don't have to be recorded if you do not want to. Will you be fine with that? Is that okay? Okay.
Well, what do you want to know?
Okay. Are you working? Yeah. Or do you work? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, are you independent or do you have somebody that's behind you?
No. No one controls what I do.
Do you have a pimp or have you ever had a pimp?
I have. I don't. I'm independent now, but I have.
What got you into this, if you don't mind me asking? Drugs, okay. What kind of drugs?
Heroin.
Heroin, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a hard drug to get off. Yeah.
Really?
And when you don't have it, you get very sick.
Okay.
Traffickers use heroin by selling heroin to people who are already looking to buy heroin, knowing that those people are addicted to heroin, using heroin as a tool to manipulate and trap them into loyalty to that pimp as their heroin supplier.
You become deprived and just obligated and expected to do things without being taken care of. So.
Right.
At first, of course, they treat you like a queen, give you everything you want, wheel you in, wine and dine you, and then slowly but surely you end up on the bottom of the barrel, but still giving everything you make. So.
How do women get into working with
I
think
they're looking for, like, they're lonely.
Right.
They want someone to protect them.
Do you think that the pimp knew that it was human trafficking?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And a lot of people just continue to do that.
They claim that they don't. They're just ignorant, and they're just ignorant.
Yeah.
You know, we're usually not looked at as a part of society. We're usually just looked at as whatever. When one of us are murdered, you don't see it on the news, but if somebody else is murdered from the suburbs or a girl that isn't a prostitute, it's all over the place. You know what I mean? So, and a lot of times she's murdered by a John. You know what I mean?
What are you hoping, society, what do you think someone could do to help you? You know, what is it?
Stop throwing us in jail, put us in rehab.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They become invisible. Because unless you're out here looking, you don't even you have no idea. And Hollywood doesn't help that because it's very, like you said, just sensationalized. It's just like this thing. And it's not to say that there are no sex workers in certain areas that have that particular look.
Being mentally abused every day and then mentally manipulated on top of substance abuse, on top of that's the only provider that you have, and especially if the woman's self-esteem is already on 0%, you know, that's all they have. Yeah. So they feel like, and especially too with the manipulation, it turns into us against them kind of way, like her and her pimp against us. So she's not gonna trust us because a lot of times the pimp has been abused her so much and manipulated her so much that in her mind she believes that that's all she has and that's the only person who is going to be good to her. So she's going to say whatever she wants to us because in her mind we are the enemy.
Right, so we have this image, I think, from popular media that traffickers are these big, evil people and organized crime. And if that was the case, my job and the job of law enforcement and prosecutors would be a lot easier.
People say, you know, they're pathological or they're sick or there's a problem with them to traffic other people. But often they're brought into this and all they are doing is utilizing their techniques for survival.
Sometimes we think about a perpetrator as this, you know, this dark, mischievous person or somebody from another country or older people. You know, this person was 19 years old when I met him, and he had said he had been doing this since he was 16.
He was nice. I mean, he's like one of those sweet talkers. You know, like he tells something this, and then next thing you know, he's person other place. So that's what he did. Sort of a person he is. He talked to my parents. He was very nice with them. He promised all this to them, and then once we came here, he was a complete different person. Yeah.
I remember being really scared because he had said, you know, what would you do if you turned around right now and I was right there? And I could imagine. I just thought about the fear, you know, just thinking that he could be there at any moment. You know, and back then you didn't have the internet to hide behind, so he had to be charismatic. He had to get out there and, you know, it was that face-to-face intervention. He just made you feel special, like it was all about you. And coming from a very dysfunctional, very toxic family, dealing with a lot of abandonment issues, for me it was really hard. I mean, we could go to have dinner, and the only thing I could think about while we were having dinner was if he said he had to use the bathroom, was he coming back?
The same guy who helped me out, he was the one that helped Scourge. Well,
you can say a perpetrator's name.
I couldn't make any decision whether, I was always wondering what he thought. You know, was I making a decision that he would like? So it was kind of hard to move on. So when the FBI came to see me, I told them that nope, he had not forced me into anything. I was already doing it before I met him. I was going to continue to do it when he was no longer around. I didn't have any, you know, I looked at what I had there in Jackson, and then what was he offering me? Well, sometimes that just seemed better than nothing, even though it wasn't good.
John Claude Tobiabe petitioned to bring his wife and his 4 children back to the United States. And after they were here, he started to treat them pretty much as his own personal slaves.
They never questioned because we don't go out very much to see people, so it was just like that.
I just don't understand, Bridget, like how
I don't know
legally you can
change your name.
So here's what happened.
do that.
You know, years prior, comes to the United States and makes an asylum claim, and says that he has this family. And so when you claim asylum, you get to, and you win, you get to bring your family members here. So then he just went back and found people to fill the slots.
Throughout those years and 5 years I was with him, he pretty much treated me like I was nobody to him. He literally beat me a lot. He made me do work for him. He had me doing cleaning the house for him and some of his friends, cleaning cars, just doing chores around the house.
If they, you know, did not perform the chores that they were supposed to, they were reprimanded, and this happened for several years.
Even though the place is clean, it makes you do it more. You make sure that it's spotless. You want to make sure that he's just everything's done his own way, you know. Even though we do it right, he wants us to do it again so he can see it. I pretty much have no life for myself. I can't have a friend. I can't do anything that normal kids do. When I go to school, I have to wear jacket, I have to wear sweaters, to sit in a corner because my hands are swollen, my back's all bruised, I have like cuts on my body and stuff. I have to sit in a corner and just write and just be a quiet person because that's all I do at house. I don't go anywhere, so the only thing I know to do is just be quiet and listen and do whatever people tell me to do.
His whole demeanor and defense on that is that he's giving these children a better life in the United States, and that they needed to follow these strict rules or they weren't going to be able to succeed.
The physical and the mental state I was in a state of fear. Every time I was speaking, I feel so scared out of my mind.
The physical torture, beating me and starving me you inflicted was so painful that I prayed at night that God would either help me to be free or allow your assaults to kill me. I wish you could have gotten to know me for the person I am. When you removed me from my family, you were all I had. I looked to you for guidance. I know you did not respect me or even think of me as a human being. In life, we must have some balance. I would dream of being able to rest.
Every year we see labor trafficking cases in industries I never would have suspected. Farm workers, restaurant workers, domestic servants. We've also seen stories reported nationwide about young boys brought from Africa and exploited in basketball. That was a shock to me. And so really, I no longer think of any industry being slave-free because it could pop up in some ways. If a trafficker can find a way to profit off of a person's exploitation, then we'll probably see it in that industry.
After Hurricane Katrina, Signal International needed workers to recrew several of their oil rigs, and so they brought in around 500 workers from India doing welding and other what's considered non-skilled labor. And so they, with the use of an attorney and also a labor contractor recruiter in India, were able to find 500 men and encourage them to come to the United States, doing so after having made several false promises.
Essentially, companies in the U.S. and companies elsewhere will hire recruitment agencies or subcontract with those agencies to find them temporary workers.
So they began working. Several of them had paid recruitment fees in thousands of dollars in order to come to the United States, and they began working, and while they were here, they also were required to pay for their housing.
We found recruitment fees up to $25,000 US, and so some people might say, well, how could anyone afford those fees for a job? And through our interviews with survivors, we found that they would often mortgage family property. They would take out high interest rate loans from loan sharks, and then the interest would compound later on when they were trafficked.
The company would allow for them to live off of their facilities, but if they did so, they still had to pay the $1,000, $50 rent. And so most of the individuals did live in the housing provided by Signal International. They were housed in rooms the size of about a double-sized trailer, with 24 individuals being placed in each of those housing facilities. They couldn't leave and go to other employment within the United States. If they did leave that employment, it meant they had to go back to their home country. And so in the Signal International case, the jury actually did find that those workers were subjected to human trafficking.
So there's this question of, well, did the U.S. companies know what was going on? In some cases, we couldn't find the evidence that they did, but in other cases, there was evidence that, for example, the company was sending their lawyers to meet with the recruitment agency and to meet with workers, and they were engaging in levels of fraud and coercion at that point of recruitment.
It's easy to think that somebody who's making all of the wages that they're promised is free to leave, but that's not always the case. And if a trafficker is aware of that and uses either threats or immigration status in order to keep that person from voluntarily leaving, that's still trafficking, even if that worker is receiving all of the rights and benefits of that employment that they expected.
Labor trafficking is different. It has 3 words, and they're really important to recognize. Want a job.
There's the fear that they'll be blacklisted, that the fact that they're bringing a case against their employer will become public information. Other employers will find out about it. It's especially concerning for guest workers who are here based on a visa that's tied to their employment, because their ability to return the following year is really based on whether or not that employer wants them.
Most of the traffickers in the cases we work on are what I would call mom and pop traffickers. And what I mean by that is 1 or 2 people who have 1 to 5 exploited persons underneath them and are compelling them into service. And so when it's those small pockets of people who are doing it, it's much harder to go after because it's not a huge organized enterprise.
When you break down the elements of force, fraud, and coercion, you have things like diminishing someone's resistance, breaking them down, demeaning and demoralizing them, so calling them names.
When we dehumanize people with our rhetoric around immigration, traffickers are a step ahead, because that's what traffickers need to do. They need to dehumanize people and turn them into commodities. And so if we're on the traffickers' team and already doing that, it is even harder for labor trafficking victims to step out of the shadows.
To me, I thought this was normal, but then the more like you experience the pain, the more I realize that this is not normal, and every time I get beaten or get hurt, we don't go anywhere. He doesn't want us to go anywhere because he wants to keep everything to himself. So I don't even know what, back then I don't know what that was, so now I know he doesn't want people to know what's going on in the house. So.
You will never know that it's going on, because a lot of it takes place behind closed doors in a small situation, and they limit the exposure of the victim as much as possible so that this doesn't happen.
There's something that we have not recognized if you're over 30 years of age, and that is how powerful the computer is in our kids' lives.
You don't necessarily see victims out walking the streets, whereas you would have, in the 80s and 90s. Now it's all through social media.
You can have a smartphone and run a criminal enterprise.
I don't think people understand what that Craigslist is, Backpage is, and there are another 50 exactly like them. We throw those 2 names around like they're the only.
Search Michigan, and let's do Lansing right now.
Okay.
Okay, so this section contains sexual content, including pictorial nudity and adult language. It says, I also agreed to report suspected exploitation of minors and/or human trafficking to the appropriate authorities. That's disturbing.
Yeah, that was today around noon.
Should we call it?
Hello.
Hi, is this?
Yeah.
My name is Laura, and I just saw your Backpage ad. Yeah, I'm a part of a film crew. I'm doing a documentary film about sex trafficking, sex work, labor trafficking in Michigan.
You're not like the police, are you, though?
No, I'm not the police, no. It's just me talking to a phone right now, and a camera's on me. And if you decline, this will not go in the film. But if you agree, then we would like to talk to you.
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you an independent person, or do you have a pimp or whatever you call it?
No, I don't.
Have you ever?
Kind of.
Would you like to tell us about that?
I have. I mean, it was kind of like that, but it was more so like, I guess I would put it as like it turned into a relationship. I met him through my sister, and it was like obviously through like a drug thing, and this is like, okay, we do what we do, but you give them your money, and I'm not justifying what they're doing, but I mean, they still make sure you're okay at the end of the day.
How did you come into doing this?
Through my older sister. She started it, and then I kind of just experimented with it.
Do you know a lot of people that actually use Backpage in this fashion? How common is this?
very common. You would be very surprised, especially in like my age group. I wouldn't say popular, but it's becoming something where if you need extra cash, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, interesting. And are you going to like school or anything on the side?
Yeah, well, no, not right now. I have to pay off my student loan, but once I do that, then I will be back in school.
Thank you so much for actually talking with us and, you know, letting us hear your story and get to know you a little bit better.
Oh, it's no problem. You're welcome.
Yeah, take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bitch. This shit for real. You know what I'm saying? What you do? I'm trying to tell you. Hold on, I got one of my hoes right now. She's coming in. That's one right there. That's one of my things. That's like their main thing right here. Don't go real far in the game right here getting this motherfucking money. Right now, we down to $1,000 tonight. We trying to pull it two tonight. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully everything go right. Baby got it though. We gonna do this shit for real. You understand? This pimpin' 101, baby. I'll let you niggas later. All right.
The person involved in a mid-Michigan sex trafficking ring will soon be headed to prison. Mariah Houghton pleaded guilty to human trafficking and transporting a person for the purposes of prostitution. She was facing 5 other charges, but made a plea deal with prosecutors. Houghton recruited young girls as prostitutes, taking them to different motel rooms to meet men for sex.
Hello? Hi, is this Mariah?
Yes, it is.
We got a tip through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that someone's minor sister was being posted online. The FBI and the Ingham County Sheriff's Office started investigating that and found 4 different victims that were all connected to a trafficker called Christopher Bryant.
So first of all, thank you so much for speaking with us. And the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, do you want to remain anonymous?
No.
Tell us your story. Tell it from your perspective, your voice.
Okay, I was 14 and I got involved with Jonathan Purnell. We were in like a friends with benefits type of relationship, and it started becoming more. And I went through a lot of abuse and did things that I didn't want to do, but I had to do it. I was scared. We ended up getting involved with the other guy, Christopher Bryant, and he had been prostituting other girls in different states. Him and Johnson decided that either I sell myself or find girls who would prostitute themselves, and I chose to find other girls who would sell their bodies, so I wouldn't have.
Anybody can be a trafficker. Absolutely anybody. It can be your 14 or 15-year-old girl in high school.
But we've actually seen an increase in more women exploiting other women, and if you think about it, who knows a woman, what buttons to push, you know, more than another woman.
The adult he took to Phoenix, Arizona, and trafficked her there on the street. Christopher Bryant wouldn't give her any condoms until she turned her first trick to get the money. She refused to do any. When she refused to do it, he got irate. He brought her back to the hotel, beat her up, pulled her back in through the window by her feet when she tried to escape, strangled her, and raped her.
It wasn't really about the money. I just thought that if I did what he told me, he would love me more and he wouldn't put his hands on me. And it was just more of doing it to make him happy and because I was scared of him.
Right.
I was young, vulnerable, and
It's my understanding that Christopher Bryant met one of the victims, whose initials are SC, through Mariah. They took pictures of her and put them online, and then Mariah, JP, and Christopher Bryant took her to motels to prostitute.
I would just find girls who were easy, and it would depend on the act, traveler's fee, and the genders, and the amount of time that they wanted with the girls. Certain rates for a certain amount of time. We had 15 minutes, 30 minutes, half hours, hours, or overnight. Overnight would cost like $1,000, but they would never do anything under $100. And whatever they made, they would keep 50% of what they made, and we would get the other 50% of what they made.
It's very, very profitable, and there's virtually no cost of entry. So unlike buying drugs to sell drugs, those traffickers are able to get victims for free. And the only cost is a hotel room for that night, which is quickly made up by the profits of the evening. So there's very little cost of entry and there's very high profits.
So if they keep 50 and you get 50, does that mean that you have to split it between the three of you?
Well, much that they would give me, I would give to Jonathan, because he was like the main guy. He's the one who provides transportation, the hotels, the drugs, what do they call the prepaid cards to load money onto to post their ads on Backpage. So he paid for everything.
Wow, so you weren't really actually making a profit off of this?
Correct.
We were able to get social media accounts through search warrants that showed all kinds of communication between Christopher Bryant and his victims. The fact that we found so much on social media accounts it's telling that, at least for Christopher Bryant, he was proud of all the money he was making.
We do this shit for real. You know what I'm saying? This pimping shit, we out here really doing this shit. You know, we drink Goose, Remy, Ciroc, we be doing this shit for real. As you see, I do this pimping shit for real. You know
how much you pay for your shoes, man?
Once I paid $300 for the cohorns, they shining right now. We about to take this shit and go there for real. You feel what I'm saying? This is just something simple right now. We start doing, you know, a couple dollars getting flew around. We gonna do this shit.
Where does the trafficking actually occur?
We have done out of a townhouse and houses, but when we were using the hotel rooms, we would pay for, or would pay for a couple days because the girls would just constantly use that room over and over again.
For the most part, the hotels have been very cooperative in providing us the records that we've requested or subpoenaed.
Yeah, because you see, you've got two things going on in the hotel. You have help that may be trafficked, as well as guests who are trafficked. So the hospitality industry is one of those industries that are starting to look at themselves and talking about a code of conduct. Because again, it can't depend upon the manager to be the one that is the reporter. It should be able to be the person at the desk.
Well, you have to wonder when there's a lot of cars coming and going, and there's a lot of different people coming and going from the same rooms. I mean, you would certainly think that if management was looking out for things, they would see some patterns.
Yeah, we got the key to shit. We should have the key to every room in this motherfucker.
I think I got the key right here.
That's the key.
2 rooms. You feel what I'm saying? This right here is the fucking domain.
He talking about the dope fucking bang.
Domain. And you know what I'm saying? This is the part of it. You know, I'm really doing this shit for real. Let me show you what my people looking like. You know what I'm saying?
Y'all niggas don't even know where this at, man. I guarantee you just know we're in the city.
I'm out here. I ain't even in the city. We motherfuckers.
We ain't in Southfield, nigga. None of that shit. None of that shit, man.
Do you think any of the hotel staff had any idea what was going on? You know, people were in on this?
We used only 3 different hotels, and a lot of them got the idea that there was something going on, which was off of. They were well known for sex trafficking rings, and then there was another one we used, which was one of the guys who worked in the building was meeting with, they would pay to meet with one of the girls.
They probably know we're coming in right now too. We're just kind of wanting to go around and talk to people in different hotels and see if anyone knows like what human trafficking is, where it occurs, if you've had any instances of it happening here in this hotel.
Nothing was going here.
Nothing's going on here?
No.
Are you sure?
We won't allow that.
Okay, because we spoke with a trafficker who said that they ran their operation out of within the Lansing area.
It's not our business.
Why is it not your business, though?
No, people come in and ask for a room. We won't ask where are you working, what are you going to do here.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you don't think it's suspicious when regulars come in continuously and ask for rooms? Okay. And you don't hear anything yourself? No.
I'll say if any customer complains about any nonsense going in, I'll say them to directly call to the cops. So that cops can come and talk to them.
Have the cops ever come here for trafficking or anything, like prostitution before?
Maybe around 5 to 6 times.
5 to 6 times?
So then the question is, how did you eventually get caught?
Once we got the tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children about the minor who was being posted online. We were able to get internet records for that advertisement relevant to physical locations where the FBI could go and search.
One of the undercover police detectives had called and pretended to be a John. They set up a meeting for her to come to a hotel with him.
There was all kinds of communication between Christopher Bryant and his victims, including threats, including anger that girls were starting to snitch on him, that he was going to kill them, and photos of him fanning thousands of dollars of cash in hotel rooms, all of which was very helpful to the investigation.
And said he would give her half of the money now and half later. And she said she didn't feel comfortable going by herself, so I told her I would follow behind her.
Yeah.
And I followed behind her and we pulled into a parking lot. And the officer said that his engine was ticking. When he said that, I felt like something was wrong, but by the time I could react, there was, a whole bunch of undercover police cars surrounding me.
All of the victims had difficulty testifying. All of them were afraid to see him. Some of them could not remember anything once they got to the stand.
Did you ever expect the moment, to kind of finally come down to this?
I expected it, and I was relieved because I was ready to get out of it. I just didn't feel like myself. I thank God every day that I made it out alive and I'm safe, even though I'm in here. It's just giving me an opportunity to get myself together and get the help that I need.
We have to address the demand.
Demand within human trafficking or sex trafficking is relatively simple when you break it down to its base in saying that the individuals, the victims, are a reusable commodity. They are a continual renewal resource so that the individuals can continue to utilize them over and over and over again and regain or recapture the cost or the monies for that.
Most of your Johns are suburbanites. They're, neighbors of a lot of people.
Yeah, they're like everyday people. There's been like businessmen, school kids.
We have found men that are victims of sex trafficking as well. The number's lower, based purely on demand again. We've had transgender males and females of both.
If we don't approach the people that are out there willing to pay for it and that are making the big bucks on it and get rid of them, then it's futile.
You can get my cat in there. Like I found her. She was abandoned in a abandoned house, and I was just starting my recovery process, and so we kind of rescued each other, didn't we? Yep. And I've had her over 16 years now. She's getting older though.
She's incredibly pretty.
She's just keep on petting. For me, it just doesn't feel right anymore because every relationship that I've ever had is based on a transaction. So for me to hug my kids, it was hard to do. I couldn't, it was hard for me to tell them that I love them.
My teacher came to me after school one day and said, "Why are you always so quiet in the back here? You don't talk to us." And I just burst into tears and since, because I can't trust people, I have a problem trusting people because that's something he took away from me. Trust is just, it's not there. So I couldn't tell her anything. And then she saw like my hands all bruised up and puffed up and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, I told her a lie, but then eventually I started to earn her trust. She earned my trust in me. Then I was able to come out of my bubbles and share some of my story with her, and then she was able to help me.
I had a friend call me the other day and she said, there's a nail salon next door to my business, and every morning they drop off 6 women in a van to work. It doesn't look right, Edie.
There were just some recent studies that were done. Studies have been few and far between. And the studies indicated that people really do believe there's human trafficking, but they don't know what to do about it.
My goal was to create a shelter for women after they were rescued so that they could heal from the trauma, from the experience and from their life. Part of my interest in this is I'm a recovering woman, and during my addictions I realized that I could be one of these women really easily.
I wanted to go and work with survivors in Nepal. And then the most shocking thing, it was in my own backyard. It was here in Michigan. I want to be a voice for advocacy for the healing of survivors. These are whole human beings that need to be recognized. How do you go to a job or take care of a family when you have the symptoms of PTSD? But when people learn that they have power, and they have power to heal themselves, and they learn techniques like breathing exercises, learning how to calm the nervous system, those are tools they will have for the rest of their lives. Resources absolutely need to be available. They need to be available for survivors.
The title is Among the Darkest Shadows, and it's based on a play by Jose Cruz Gonzalez about two victims of human trafficking. And it's all done through the medium of dance. By telling the story of two very specific people, we hope to personalize it and have people better understand there's not just 20 million people, 30 million people that are, trafficked around the world, that these are people with families, they had goals and dreams, and they're struggling badly, and now they're caught in this cycle that they can't get out of. Putting the issue under that microscope gives us opportunities to tell it in a way that is vivid, eye-opening, but I think they'll understand this world better when they see the play.
People who can work with stories, that's going to change the whole game. It's a 4-section work, and each section is composed by a different composer and deals with a different person in a particular sex trafficking ring. We thought that this piece was going to be a good way to get people to think about trafficking who maybe find it difficult and who might be somewhat reluctant to address the subject. It's not easy to talk about, and it deals with things that sort of play on your fears. You need lots of people working to solve this in lots of different ways in order to find a point of sort of the critical mass where you can actually sort of start to move the needle.
All right, so before we get started today, I'd like to just introduce myself. My name is Deborah Monroe. I'm a peer support specialist, and I just want to get to tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here today. So this is where I always do the training with the women that are being trafficked and coming out and working on their recovery. A lot of these topics pertain to, how do you deal with the fears that you may have? What kind of support would be helpful when you feel like nobody else understands what it is that you've been through? So I got connected to community mental health agencies, and then they talked about Stockholm Syndrome because I would protect him at any means at one point. It took 3 years before I could actually say I could let go. And then somebody had talked about, they thought I would be a great peer support specialist, using my lived experience to be able to reach out and help other people. What I was looking for was somebody to care about me and somebody to take me in and be a family. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be a family. For me to work with girls that have experienced being out there on the streets and abused and used by men that really don't care about them and took advantage of would be like coming back full circle. Pam took a risk on me. She didn't know, but she allowed me the opportunity to even come out and do a training because I was inspired by you when you were training me.
And even now when you talk about the human trafficking, to notice the amount of people that will come up to you and bring you aside and say, that's my story, that's so similar to what I went through. We don't have another trainer that brings that kind of a unique background of a recovery story that people then go to and see the hope and see the support that they can get.
All right, does anybody have any questions?
No, doing sport is what I love the most, running track.
This is my family, this is my track family.
My step is just get to college, get my BSN for now, and then from there I can figure out what to do next and take it slowly and make my way out there. Anyone who's out there who's going through the same situations as me, I want them to know that there's always hope. You're not alone. There's plenty of people out there who are going through the same situation. You just have to find a way, pray that something will come out of the situation like me. I like to think here and just observe nature because, you know, it's nature around us. So yeah, this is my secret fun area. It's called the prayer garden. Yeah. My friends, if they need to talk to me, we usually meet over here because this is like in one location I can meet you at. So we have a seat, we talk, we pray the rosary, we just, whatever you want me to do, I like to do it right here. This is one of my directors. He's like the most important. He's the awesome dude. His name is Miguel.
We're talking about yourself.
This is Miguel, yeah. I got a scholarship to be a member of the campus ministry group. We go out, reach out to students who are struggling with their faith and trying to meet them where they are. And so, yeah, it's just that's what I want to do. So, you know, I like doing it, and I'm glad I'm in this school. This is home for me. Like, I like this school a lot.
Did you ever think this was going to be the outcome?
No, not at all. Never, never.
What did you think was?
Honestly, I don't know. That wasn't gonna be out of that ever. No, it's something I'm gonna just deal with until I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Yeah. Gonna meet him. He's awesome. Mr. President got visited.
How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Well, at first we didn't know how comfortable he would be telling his story.
Yeah.
But his story has inspired a lot of people in ways that you won't even know for a long time, probably.
Yeah.
But we're very happy you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me
Nice
come here.
T-shirt.
Right?
Good choice.
He's representing. He's got it, yeah.
Yeah, he's smart.
my home.
He's smart.
He is really smart.
Judge was very touched by my victim statement letter, but Kojo, of course, did not make any reaction to it. Because of who I am, because of what kind of person I was raised to be, I wrote a letter with a heart telling how much I forgive him, how much, even though the pain that he has inflicted on me, I still forgive him for everything. But watching him not react to it actually hurt me more because I put a lot of my time into that letter. I sat there for so many hours, thinking what I can write. I can write mean things on that letter, but I did not. I chose to write a loving letter to him saying, look, I forgive you. And watching his reaction, nothing happened. It really hurt me a lot. Hurt me more than what he done to me because I really put time into this letter from him.
You don't have any plans to go back to Hobo to visit your family?
I want to, but because of the way my situation is, I can't leave the state. I can't leave the United States because I don't have a passport. I don't have my birth certificate, and all those things are holding me back. I really want to go visit my brother, my sisters. I miss them. It's almost 10 years now coming up, and I haven't seen them since. And it's something I wake up every day thinking, God, just keep them alive for me. One day I'll go visit them before, and then whatever you want to do, you can do with them, but just keep them safe from until I go back and visit them one day.
Do they know you're going to college and everything?
Yeah, they do, yeah. They know that for a fact, yes.
Are they really proud of you?
They are, yeah. My dad is not here to say that, but I'm pretty sure he's with me in spirit. I'm sure he's watching. Yeah.
I think with sex trafficking, it may be a little bit easier to sort of point your finger at the bad guy. With labor trafficking, the more you do that, the more you realize you're starting to point back at yourself. If we are empowered with more information about who we're buying and purchasing from and the practices that are going on, we can essentially vote with our wallet.
We need to have public access to resources immediately.
I mean, we fought in this country for civil rights forever. This is just another civil right that we have to fight for.
Speaking out, being involved, getting engaged in social media, volunteering to be involved.
Law enforcement by itself won't be able to solve the problem.
A collaborative effort's gotta happen, and we have to be the leader in this in the world. We have to be. All of us are victims of human trafficking.
Every one of us could be one of them.
Do what you do well, educate the communities you're already in, and you will make a huge difference.
When people recognize that indeed they have power to interrupt something, maybe within our time in this century, we can really look at stopping slavery.
Hi, my name is Allie Martinez and I'm the chair of the Mid-Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force. Thank you for viewing the documentary film Break the Chain. I'm joined by the director and producer, Laura Swanson, to discuss the film and the pervasive issue of human trafficking. Hi Laura, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. We'd love if you just kind of started us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what got you into this project.
Sure, so I kind of came into this because I am a survivor of sexual assault and relationship violence. And I found myself drawn towards those issues, and I worked with nonprofits and survivors of sexual assault at the Center for Survivors at Michigan State University. I decided that I wanted to make my first film about sexual assault, primarily because there were so many myths and misconceptions around the issue, and I found myself as a victim feeling like people didn't understand the issue. And so I wanted to make films for people to understand from victim-centered approach and perspectives.
Yeah.
And at the end of that film, I knew that I wanted to make another documentary. And at that same time, I started noticing all these headlines for human trafficking within the news and within Lansing, which is where I was located at the time.
Yeah.
I decided to contact Jane White, the director of the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force, just to learn a little bit more about it. And what ended up happening is she told me that, you know, there's all these myths and misconceptions around human trafficking, and survivors resemble those of domestic violence, and that people have a hard time understanding the issue, and it's been highly sensationalized within media. And so I said, this is absolutely where I want to dedicate my time and try to make a human trafficking kind of 101 documentary to educate the communities within Michigan about what's happening here in our state.
Yeah, and I feel like it's really evolved in terms of, you know, it was a Michigan-based film, and I love that. Every time I show it, I'm so proud to say that. But it's really gone beyond that and has had a pretty incredible impact. Do you want to talk a little bit about that impact?
Yes, so I think that we wanted to center it in Michigan and use the task force agencies and the people that are doing amazing work in Michigan, but we also wanted to make sure that we used it to also be able to generalize to the rest of the United States about domestic human trafficking. And so it kind of just ended up being able to spread and make it into film festivals and then be used in all different states, and also has gone abroad to places like England, like the UK actually buys Break the Chain more on Amazon than the United States does. And yeah, so it's been able to be employed as a training and educational resource extending beyond the state of Michigan, because it doesn't matter that it's the state of Michigan, because the reality is that this is happening in every single state and every single country everywhere around our world.
Right, and I think that's what's so profound about it is it was in real neighborhoods, in real areas, and the people within it were real people, right? The documentary focused on victims, but it also focused on the people who are kind of in the fight, who are those regular, ordinary people. And so can you tell me a little bit about what it was like working with the prosecutors, the victim service advocates, all of the various people in this fight who came on to help with this project?
Well, it was very amazing, honestly, to meet everybody who's working and doing the groundwork on a daily basis that most people, quite frankly, don't know about, who are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into trying to tackle this issue throughout the United States. It was awesome as a filmmaker, because you don't get stuck in your sect of like how you're working on the issue. You get to meet with all of these different people that are tackling the issue from different perspectives and different backgrounds, and you got to kind of see what people are doing in their different areas, and then you also got to see kind of some conflicts, and people have different ideas for how to tackle things and different methodologies around it. But what's amazing is the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force as a whole has been trying to make sure that all of these people are all coming together to have a collective response, and that's why we really wanted to partner with them and showcase the people that were really underneath the task force, because Michigan's doing a really great job in terms of trying to collectively work on the issue together and not have those separations between how people are working to fight.
Yeah, and so it must have been, you know, making that merge from doing a documentary film on sexual assault to sex trafficking. There's some definite connections there. So what was it like to kind of open your world to labor trafficking?
It was hard.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest reasons why it's hard is because when you start to look into labor trafficking more, like they say in the film, Colleen Owens in the film, when she says you point the finger this way at sex trafficking and a sex trafficker, but really labor trafficking, you end up pointing back at yourself. You start to understand how just woven into the fabric of our economy and capitalistic world of how exploitation has just been so prevalent and is woven in to the point where we don't even understand that we're purchasing products from labor trafficking individuals, and this is happening all around us. And the fact that it gets ignored too, I think is hard for me to deal with, trying to bring labor trafficking into the spotlight just as much as sex trafficking, because I feel people tend to think the sex trafficking pulls on the heartstrings. It's a bit easier to feel disconnected or view it as this crazy violent thing that you can't even imagine. But you're at the other end of it, labor trafficking, buying products and being in these areas and all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that was hard to see how we ignore a huge population of the human trafficking problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm sure that our viewers are probably, after viewing the film and sitting here, they want to know more probably about the victims in particular, right? So we talk about how things are a little bit sensationalized. We connect well with stories. And so I've heard you talk a little bit about your relationship with Kwame and some of the challenges you faced in the beginning and how he kind of overcame and opened up. I'd love if you could share that with our viewers.
Yes. So when I just talked about labor trafficking and how difficult it is to notice that, it's also difficult to find survivors of labor trafficking, and it's also hard for them to want to speak out. A lot of times people have been traumatized, or they have a hard time connecting with the idea that they have been a victim of this type of abuse. And that's kind of what happened with Kwame. So Kwame was very distraught over everything that happened to him. And when we originally approached him, we kind of had to go through Bridget Carr from the University of Michigan, because she wanted to, rightfully so, protect her, survivors and make sure that they were not going to be exploited again in a new way through media. So when we met with him, it was very much like, we're going to go in, it's going to be a 1-hour interview, it's going to stop right at this time, you can only ask these questions so as to not make him upset. If he says he wants to stop at any time, it's going to stop. And then also, he's not going to reveal his identity.
Yeah.
So that's how we came in approaching everything with Kwame. And it took actually I feel like 3 months of even just talking to him in general through email for him to even to agree to this. And it took like 6 months for us to even pinpoint a labor trafficking survivor that would even possibly think about coming forward. But we were adamant that a labor trafficking survivor had to be included in the film. And it was after us doing the trailer and showing him the footage of the trailer with his face blurred that he said, wow, this is amazing. My impact statement that was read in court that we used in the trailer, he said that the person who read it they did a great job, and he could tell there was a lot of empathy and respect in it. And he just said, I give you permission to reveal my identity. And that was a huge thing for us, because even within looking in the media and the news articles that had come out about the case that he was involved in, he was anonymous the whole time. That impact statement was anonymous too. So we felt very honored and also just excited for him, because that was the point in time for him where he clearly felt like empowered by this and empowered by his ability to speak up and see visually that it was going to create some sort of change and that he could help other people by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you talked about the empowerment that he felt in being able to share his story. That is the other end of that spectrum of sharing survivor stories and having them share is the healing that can take place. And I often in presentations will only show the trailer because it really does have that impact on people. And there's so many profound statements that we can unpack just in the trailer.
Yes.
Having the entire film and the process of going through that, the months long that you endured to make this happen and to build that trust is really incredible. And so we also, on the other hand, we have Debbie, who I think was a little bit further along in her journey of survivorhood. But talk about what it was like working with Debbie.
With Debbie, that's exactly what you just said is what we were looking for. We knew Kwame was very, new, and we didn't want to have, we didn't want to have the possibility of re-traumatizing, everybody that was in the film. And we also wanted to have a subject that very clearly had gone through this process and understood everything that had happened to them. Kwame was sort of still in the middle of processing everything that happened and very new. And Debbie's more able to say, okay, so I went to the psychologist and they said that I had this, or now I'm trying to do these things. And she just felt a little bit more secure and already that level of empowerment there. And I think it just helps to educate the public more because she has a little bit more knowledge behind her. And yeah, it was really great.
Yeah, so we look at both Kwame and Debbie, and we know they have a backstory, a vast backstory that was included in the film, and even more to that. But what the film really tried to help folks understand is the vulnerabilities behind people who are trafficked. And so can you talk a little bit about that? What somebody how do they get into this, essentially? Because we have this sense of like, they get kidnapped off the street, like in Kwame's case, he got kidnapped from his other country and he came to America to have a better life. And with Debbie's story, you think about, young girls who just get involved in these types of things. But what really lies behind someone who's been trafficked?
Well, anybody can be a victim of human trafficking, as you know. So we always like to preface those statements with saying it doesn't matter, here and there. But we do see these collective vulnerabilities of people like Debbie, who was clearly involved in an abusive household, had a lower socioeconomic class, and didn't have the same ability to have that access to education. Those are all big vulnerability factors that are really able for traffickers to come in and play on that. So, when people tend to blame the victim and say, well, how did they just, get into this? It's kind of like, well, what would you do if you felt like you had no support system, you didn't have a big education behind you to help move you forward in something, and you didn't have as much access to resources and people, and you have a prior history of abuse that's already been making you feel like you're less than, and somebody comes into the picture and gives you all these promises of how they're going to give you that better life, how they see you, and you feel like for the first time that person sees you. Someone, especially a minor, it's so easy to fall for that. I could fall for that. I have fallen for that. I've not been a victim of human trafficking, but in other ways. And so it makes sense that these things would happen. And then in the case of Kwame, he was in more of a war-torn area. He was with somebody who the family really respected and felt like was going to bring him over to the United States and give him, again, a better life. And then that individual turned and took advantage of him. What did Kwame do wrong, thinking that he was going to go and get a better education and a better livelihood over in another area? So with him, you can see, there's political instability in the country that he was in, these things that shove people out of areas and move them. A lot of it comes from desperation for needing something else. And also with vulnerabilities, I want to point out that LGBTQ populations and people of color tend to be more affected by human trafficking, and that's just because those populations of people have been oppressed and have the systemic racism, and that builds a collective community vulnerability within those populations.
Yeah, absolutely. We often fight with the myth here in our communities of this, someone's going to kidnap me at the grocery store type of thing. And I always tell people to be vigilant wherever you go. You want to protect yourself in any way that you possibly can from anyone who might be looking to harm you, because it does happen, right? But what I often tell people then is that I'm not going to get kidnapped because people are going to look for me, right? A trafficker doesn't have to do the work to keep me concealed from the people who are going to come and try to track me down, because there are thousands of young boys and girls all across the community who no one's going to look for, right? And so when we talk about those vulnerabilities, how easy it is to kind of slip through the cracks of the system, that the traffickers don't have to be smart in their tactics of how to get people. But can you talk about how they're smart in their tactics of keeping people once they have them?
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is also where the psychological, you know, pressures come in, and where psychological manipulation comes in, and how, you know, traffickers a lot of times will woo individuals with these false promises and get them into the relationships, and they will do this for a long period of time. It's not just like a 2-week thing, you know, they'll take months sometimes to do this. And then they will use force, fraud, and coercion, the 3 main factors of human trafficking, to threaten an individual, make you feel less than, use force in some cases. And I think all of those things make people feel like they are in a helpless situation, and especially if you're among a population that's already been dehumanized or oppressed, or has that insecurity related to law enforcement and things like that. You know that you're not going to necessarily be able to just escape and run and get all these things for yourself from people. And I think that makes it easier for traffickers to remind those individuals of, you know, where they're at. Like, oh, you are a migrant worker.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about you. We dehumanize you in the United States,
right?
And think these things about you and have these judgments and stereotypes. So then playing off of those things to make someone feel terrified, like if they were to speak up, nobody's going to care about me and my story. And sadly, there are absolutely circumstances where you see that is the case.
Yeah, and so we can talk about all the barriers that Kwame faced, being in a different country, and not, you know, there's language barriers, there's barriers to proper identification and all of that. But I want to talk a little bit about probably one of the most profound things that Debbie says through the film, when you all are driving by the house and she says, you know, that's the room where he shot her in the face. And so can you talk about what the psychological hold that someone would have on a victim if they shoot someone else in the face, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, really put yourself into that perspective. As much as, you know, I've been to trainings and things before, and people have said, well, I'll just run away, or if I saw that happen to someone, I'll just go and call the cops. But it's like, if you see that happening, that's incredibly traumatic and terrifying. What's going to happen to you if you possibly try to run, or it doesn't work out exactly well? You know that there's like a death sentence for you. What would you do to keep yourself alive? This is just basic survival. So it makes sense that people behave in this way and victims stay.
Yeah, and that must have had an effect on you. I mean, hearing that for the first time. It's a heart-stopping moment in the film, but you're in the car listening to this, you know.
So actually that car ride, I mean, it lasted hours. We put a very small portion of it in the film. I mean, we drove by dozens and dozens of places where Debbie just said, this is where I was abused, this is where I was raped here, this is what happened here. And after that car ride and going throughout those things, I had to take like a several-week break from making the film, because it's just really disturbing. And it's disturbing when you actually see the places and you feel like you're walking through those vivid memories with somebody, and realizing like the terror and the fear, and how helpless and held captive you would feel like you are, even if there's not chains around you as people like to think. You know, there has to be.
Yeah, and while you're going through this, everybody else is going about their daily lives, you know, driving here, driving past this, you know, walking, working in these buildings, living in these buildings. And so having that sense of like the earth is stopping around me, but it's not for anybody else. And I imagine that's how victims feel when they pass through these as well. When Debbie's pointing out, like, this happened to me here, this happened to me here, but the rest of the world goes on. And that in itself, just our complacency in their world of trauma has to be so jarring for a survivor. And I think that the film does such a good job of really portraying that there's so much going on behind closed doors, right? Even if there's not the chains that are holding people in. And so another one that I kind of want to talk about that is sort of an earth-stopping moment is when you're on the phone with the young lady who's incarcerated, do you want to remain anonymous, right? And so when you're talking to Mariah, who her case is challenging, right? So she is a victim, but she's also a perpetrator. Can you talk a little bit about the nuances behind her story?
Yes. So a big reason why we wanted to have Mariah as the sex trafficker that we were going to talk to in the film is because if we're breaking the chain to show how people don't necessarily understand these things are happening or how complex things are happening, then we need to show the complexity within the traffickers as well. And this is a situation that happens quite frequently that people don't think of, which is a person who is previously victimized, who happens to be the same sex as what the other people that are being victimized are, gets turned and flipped over to try to solicit and lure in other individuals, and they themselves become a trafficker. And her case is complicated because I'll ask people in screenings, do you think she's a victim or a perpetrator? Or do you think it's both? And I'll get like complete mixed answers all over the board. And for me personally, I feel like it's both because she was lured into a romantic relationship. She was exploited herself. And then, after being vulnerable and exploited and then being asked like, okay, do you want to go and flip the switch and now you're recruiting these girls? I mean, instead of you having to be the one to go do these other things, don't you think there would be like a level with anybody where you'd think, okay, maybe, I would do this other thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, her actions have hurt and affected all of these other people.
Yeah.
And so there is a difficulty in her case and in prosecuting it because it's like, well, did she do these things just because of, Jonathan Purnell and Christopher Bryan, or did she also have some sort of free will in making these decisions and doing it? And I think that's where the complexity comes in. It's the same thing as someone who was molested for a long period of time with sexual assault, and then turns around and ends up victimizing other individuals. Like, yes, they have been victimized and hurt and abused, and that is part of the problem of why it happened again. But at the same time, it doesn't mean those victims didn't, had problems because of it, and they weren't affected by their actions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a moral complexity, right? So we have this sense of wanting to feel for someone who's being victimized and having this sense of self-preservation. She's acting out of this sense to save herself, but it's not a victimless crime, right? And so I think that has opened the door to conversations nationwide about victims who are incarcerated. We think about Centoya Brown and her case, and I mean, gosh, there's dozens of them that have kind of popped up in the media since then, and looking at how do we settle this moral dilemma within the justice system and still kind of pay homage to those that have been victimized in that sense. And so I think that showing it in the film and leaving our viewers with this sense of like, where does the pendulum swing and which side am I on, is a good place to be, and in terms of that internal challenge and that internal bias that faced within each of us, right? And so that kind of brings us to like, what is the true profile of a trafficker? Because when you look at Jonathan and Christopher, we think, oh, they're monsters, right? And even within the film, they were, in a sense, kind of portrayed as a trafficker, as the true bad guys in this situation. And so what kind of profile can we place on them, if there is any?
I think there's not a profile of a trafficker other than somebody that is willing to exploit another individual for some sort of gain. And I think if honestly, if I could have done anything different in the documentary, one of the things that I would have done is talk about, is address the racial disparities within who we see as traffickers and who ends up getting arrested as traffickers. Because the reality is that all the traffickers within the film we're African American, but that's not the reality for all traffickers around the world.
Yeah.
Yet you might find that more traffickers end up in jail as African American, and that has to do with our systemic racism. It has to do with why people were oppressed for a long period of time, and our push factors of why people are in these situations. Who are those people that are in the situations where they feel like they need to choose this as an option for their livelihood as well? And those tend to be individuals that we have oppressed for a long period of time. But then at the same time, there are people that just do bad things, that you can't deny that as well. And so I think to try and put a profile about, this person looks a certain way is not going to do anything. I operate under just this assumption all the time if anybody's just capable of anything. Yeah,
and I think that that's an excellent point to make, and I agree with you that including that in the film would have been less, of this like monsterization of these particular individuals. But at the same time, like we need to see the reality, right? And I love that you said some people just really are who they are. They're monsters. But the flip side of that is that there is a culture in which these people were created. They felt like this was their option. They felt like this is like you said, the way that they create their livelihood is by the exploitation of other people, and what were their other options. And so I think that when we look at our own complacency again within this system, when we look at this supply and demand type of equation as well, I think that that's something that we wasn't really discussed in the film so much in terms of what traffickers are supplying and the demand behind that, and I'm glad that it wasn't, because of a lot of reasons. We often only focus on the demand of like, well, if men weren't buying it, then it wouldn't be an issue. But but can we talk a little bit about that, the demand and what kind of people, did you explore into that? I'm sure you did.
I did. I tried to find somebody so hard that it's harder for labor trafficking in and of that South because it can be companies and, multi-billion-dollar organizations and things like that. And oftentimes you don't see as much around labor trafficking in general. But for sex trafficking, I did try to find a person that solicited. And I got close several times and people backed out at the last minute. But I really wanted to question them about what makes you feel that you need to do this? Because that's a huge problem. It's like, well, if these people didn't have the demand and feel like they need the sex, and I couldn't get the response from that. But one of the big problems that I have with this is people a lot of times will say, if we just make selling sex legal, then it will stop. And my whole thing against that is, well, very complicated. We could go into a whole thing with that. But my other part of that is, are we going to make selling of children legal? Because a lot of times you'll also see people have preferences for ages that can be younger, and that's certainly not something that we're going to do. So it's hard to address the demand, especially for sex trafficking. I don't personally know, besides addressing it from a punishable perspective and stuff, what you do to stop people from having those particular desires. And I think it's a huge problem that law enforcement and everybody in organizations tries to figure out what we can do there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's where a lot of people get their education and their idea of what trafficking is like is from these law enforcement raids where they, go undercover, pretend to be a young lady who's soliciting herself, and then once the Johns is what we refer to them as, when they come, then that's when they get arrested. And so you'll see that on a particular night they arrested 14 individuals. This is happening a lot here in Genesee County, here in Michigan. For our viewers, they might be familiar with the GHOST team and what they do on that task force. But that's really where we start to profile what Johns look like, and they get their education about this whole prostitution, trafficking type thing from these raids, where I really feel like the documentary film kind of flipped that over on its head and showed a different version of that. And so in speaking about that and not being able to profile, you can't profile a trafficker, you can't profile a John, you can't profile a victim. You know, what was it like for you trying to put together a documentary film that was as all-encompassing as you were capable of in that moment?
It was very difficult. And I think it's also difficult because the reality is a lot of times when we were looking for funding and stuff, we would come across people that were under the guise of these misconceptions and myths, and they would say, okay, well, we need to focus on, you know, sex trafficking more, and this is what's going to sell in a movie. And I just said, I don't care what's going to sell the best in the movie. I'm here just to try the best that I can to put together a movie that's going to show you all the complexities. So the only thing that I could think of is just talk about those complexities the whole time and mention them and weave the film around them. And that's just kind of what I tried to do. It's very hard to try to narrow anything down because that's where the problems are, and that's where the problem in other media has become. And when I asked, you know, what is it that you need? What do you want to see out of a documentary to the task force? They said, we just want people to understand and showcase those things instead of continuing to go down the road of these crazy stories or this and that or sensationalizing stuff. So I said, let's make it more education based.
Yeah, and still have that pull that draws people in from the victims that you used. And I love one of the most profound things that Bridget Carr says during the documentary is talk about what you do, you know, do it well. Don't make up things. Talk about what's really happening as often as you can. And that's kind of what you've said here is, you know, our viewers might be wondering, you know, what can I do? I can't make a documentary film, maybe. I don't know any survivors. But what can I do now that I know what I know?
Yes, and that's one of the other things that we wanted to show in the film through people like Kintless Stryker doing the yoga and Mark Sullivan, who was working with music and composing out of Michigan State and the dance company, is what can you do within your realm of expertise to raise awareness and draw attention? And then at the same time, if you are wrapped up in a million other causes, I always say this to people, if you are tackling homelessness, if you are tackling broadening education, if you are tackling more support for LGBTQ communities, you are also tackling the issue of human trafficking because those are tackling the vulnerabilities that create the environment for human trafficking. And if we work in our world to help push people up, there's not going to be as much vulnerability and ability for those traffickers to find that and create this profitable business out of it.
Right, absolutely. And I think about the last year that we've had, right, and the pandemic and how that has really kind of pushed vulnerabilities to the forefront, right? And so, you know, feeding people, that's eliminating a vulnerability. Not being able to go to their local neighborhood youth center was a huge vulnerability. The amount of time that they spent on the internet now. Can you talk a little bit about what you noticed over the pandemic that might have impacted human trafficking?
Yes, everything that you just said. I mean, the amount of screen times that I'm now seeing my stepkids have. Like now, okay, we got to be more vigilant about what you're doing there if you're spending more time on the screen while we're trying to work and stuff and have you at home.
That supervision.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like you said, people also being in their homes more, and if that home is not a safe environment for them, that's also breeding that vulnerability. And then, yes, not having your access to your food, not having your communities, the strain that the pandemic has put just economically on everybody, and even just funding for organizations in general that provide those resources and provide that housing for victims. I mean, there's an influx for sure.
Yeah, of just people who have a greater need and would be more easily exploited because of that need. Yes. And so is there anything else that you want to tell us about the film? You know, it's been a few years now. You know, is there anything that just kind of burns within you of like, you know, we talked about you wish you would have added race as a factor, but is there anything else that you just want the public to know? You're gonna have to edit this because I don't know. Hold on a second.
Let me think. I think that the film, what the whole break the chain meant, was not to continue to put this idea of chains into people's mind. It was really to show that the chain is all of us and our society and how it's been made up and the vulnerabilities within it, and the supply chain is a big part of that, and how we all have the ability to do something, whether it be what we buy, and trying to think about who the employers are, and what the pay of the workers are, and trying to spend our money more appropriately, and being willing to spend more money for better projects that aren't possibly connected to labor, or to actually, if you see something, say something. I think that's the biggest one, is people see and have those heightened feelings of something's not right here, or that just looks weird, but then they say, I don't know what to do, or I don't want to get the police involved. My biggest thing is it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. Just call. Just say something with everything, because that you never know when that's going to make a huge difference, and you don't know how many times 5 other people have called reporting the same thing, and now this is kind of adding up to more of a bigger case, and things are clicking, and people can come in and possibly do something about it. But this is happening all around you. And if you think that you're not connected in some way, you're definitely wrong.
Yeah, and so do what you can with what you have to try to just notice things in your community, right? To make that small input, the see something, say something, the trying to make more equitable choices in everything that you buy. It can be very overwhelming, even as someone who's in this. I know that once you start down that rabbit hole of looking into labor trafficking, you're so right in that you're pointing the finger back at yourself. But it's really those small everyday steps in choosing maybe a different coffee brand, choosing a different chocolate brand. Doesn't have to be your whole grocery list to start, but it's those one thing at a time until you feel like you're making that sustainable change, and telling everybody you know about it, right?
Absolutely, yes, telling everybody.
Yes, and so thank you, Laura, for joining us. Thanks for this conversation and really getting us into what making this film was like, and the things that you learned and the ways that you were impacted. And thank you to our viewers for joining us today, for watching the documentary film, and for learning more. And we encourage you, if you want to reach out, if you want to learn more, there are several resources that are going to be listed on your screen. You can check locally if you're in the Midland or Tri-City area. You can check with the Mid-Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force page on Facebook. And Laura Swanson's information is also going to be included if you want to learn more about this project or other projects that Laura's working on. Thank you so much for watching.